We, the Laughing Cows, are not health professionals or certified lactation consultants. The views and opinions shared in this podcast are entirely our own and should not be considered a substitute for medical advice from qualified healthcare providers or lactation experts. Are we actually doing this?
We're doing it!
I'm Saba.
I'm Sara.
And we are the Laughing Cows. Welcome to our podcast where we talk all things exclusive breastfeeding.
From latches to leaks, we'll be taking you through our experiences and personal journeys of feeding our 4 little ones.
So whether you're a seasoned breastfeeder, new mama or mama-to-be, come on in.
We're here for you as your fellow breastfeeding sisters, providing you with the support
and laughs you need to get you through this oh so glamorous season in life.
Welcome to the very first episode of The Laughing Cows. Over the next few episodes, we'll be diving into all things breastfeeding, starting with preparation. Can you even prepare for it, or is it just one of those things you just wake up and figure out? We'll be covering it all from the mental to the physical prep, sharing our personal experiences and insights along the way. In today's episode, we're focusing on mindset, because let's be real, breastfeeding is just as much a mental game as it is a physical one. So let's get into it.
So we've got our snacks, the kids are taken care of, and we are ready to talk breastfeeding. I think this is actually the first time we're sitting down to discuss our journeys with each other.
Yeah, we haven't done this before, actually, which is kind of weird.
So, okay, go on then. Tell us why you wanted to breastfeed.
So for me, I think wanting to breastfeed wasn't really something I had to think long and hard about.
Yeah.
I think as your younger sister, I sort of watched you do it and... Well, not watched you in a weird way. That would be really just a side glance. You know?
Watch from the door frame.
Yeah, and actually it felt like it was the right thing to do when my time came. But for you, you were like the oldest and the first in our family, cousins and so on, to like breastfeed exclusively.
Yeah, I was like the pioneer. You make me sound really old, by the way, and we're not even 2 years apart. Okay, gosh.
So yeah, I feel like you had to do more of that work to like find inspiration, prepare yourself. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So I should be asking like, what was it that made you want to breastfeed?
I think it's interesting what you mentioned about me influencing you, because for me it was something really similar. So when I fell pregnant, I just knew that I wanted to breastfeed exclusively, and I was pretty passionate about it. And I think the biggest influence for me came from my mum being a pediatrician and just being so pro breastfeeding with her patients and in her work throughout our childhood. And I'm not sure if you remember that.
Vaguely.
So, I mean, growing up, I remember reading articles about breastfeeding that would be published in the local newspapers, and she did a lot of work with local mums and her patients, providing them, you know, with great resources and supporting them to breastfeed exclusively and to do it successfully as well. So naturally, I think over the years, I had all of that in the back of my mind, so that when the time came for me, I just knew I wanted to breastfeed, and that too exclusively.
Oh, okay. That's so interesting. So it was like a gradual process of passive education over the years, not just like before, you know, you're actually going to have a baby.
Yeah, definitely. I think a good example, like comparison of that is, for example, when both your parents are doctors or artists or whatever, you grow up with that kind of influence in the background. So with doctors, you know, that influence of medicine, oh, it's a great career, or, you know, with artists, like, yeah, I also want to be an artist when I grow up. So it was, you know, like, how many people do we know whose parents are doctors who have then, like, gone on to be doctors themselves?
Yeah, not us.
Yeah, okay, we broke free from that mold, but do you understand what I mean about that? Just, like, passive and gradual influence, healthy influence over the years. And because when the time came and like pregnancy happened, I was already aware of like all the health benefits of breastfeeding and also benefits in terms of bonding and connection to your child. So I knew all of that.
Yeah.
So my preparation personally was more focused on talking to friends who had breastfed and getting their take on it and any useful tips from them.
Right, yeah.
And I really think all the discussions I had throughout pregnancy with like Mama Bear and, you know, on breastfeeding exclusively and the whole you can do it approach to the topic she had, that was like a huge motivator for me and like morale boost, and that definitely got me in the right mindset to get ready to breastfeed.
Yeah, and she obviously like breastfed you as well, right?
I think she did so for about a year. But again, that wasn't a straightforward breastfeeding journey either. That had its own difficulties as well. And she also, at the same time, had experience with formula feeding as well, because that's the route she took with you.
What, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. What?
You didn't know you were bottle fed?
What? I didn't know that.
But you're also the more difficult child, though, with your breath holding spasms and stuff.
Oh my god, I had no idea. What? That's a new revelation to me.
But you know what, again, and we're going to talk about this more later, so obviously the main reason for that was because of the birth experience the second time around and age factor and so on. Yeah. It wasn't possible. And we're going to touch on that later.
So did you want to breastfeed for a specific time frame, like 2 years?
Yeah, I did have that time frame in mind as the goal, because in terms of our faith, that is the recommended amount of time before weaning. But also organizations such as the WHO, they do actually recommend that time frame too, interestingly. But what about for you? Was 2 years also a goal for you? Was it just kind of, as long as I can, I will breastfeed? Because some mums carry on feeding for several years beyond the age of 2, right? It's not a hard, fast stop.
I think for me, I didn't really have a specific time frame in mind. I was aware of that 2-year recommendation, but I also knew that it also depended on how soon I wanted to have my next child. And since I've always wanted a big family, I knew I'd have to have my next baby relatively soon. So that meant I'd have to wean before the 2-year mark.
Oh, I didn't know that. I just thought, because of the recommendation, kind of like similar to me, that you kind of just wanted to aim for 2 years of breastfeeding.
Yeah. I mean, with that in mind, I did read that continuing to breastfeed until at least 18 months is beneficial. Ultimately, becoming pregnant again, I think, and experiencing all those hormonal changes, especially in the first trimester, that really pushed me to fully wean. I was just I was getting angry.
What was the age you weaned at?
About 19 months.
19 months? Oh, wow, that's a huge achievement. I don't know how you cut it short before the 2 years, because I couldn't shake my first baby off me until around 28 months. So
I think all the hormones and just it really pushes you to just, to be honest, I actually wasn't emotional about it. I was kind of relieved.
Yeah, definitely. I think you do naturally, your body naturally reaches that point. I'm really looking forward to discussing this so much more in detail in our weaning episode in this season, or in a later season. So you said I was some positive influence in your story, but what kind of
you
preparation?
Love that, don't you?
I love it. It's I inspired someone to do something in life.
No, yeah, you definitely did.
So there is that positive influence and so on, but surely there was some kind of preparation, that you had to do to get yourself in the all-important mindset and get in the zone to breastfeed. What did you do?
Yeah. I mean, you'd think that, but looking back, I honestly feel like I wasn't fully prepared for breastfeeding. And before having the baby, all my focus was on the labor. Everyone freaks you out about the labor, how to get through it, how to push that watermelon out.
It ain't easy.
The extent of, I think, my breastfeeding preparation was basically, I'll just deal with it when the time comes. I didn't research, ask questions, or read about it at all. And like I said before, you were the big influence in my decision to exclusively breastfeed. So I think seeing you go through that, it made me assume that I'd just be able to do it too.
Right, yeah.
But in hindsight, I wouldn't recommend that approach. I went into it quite naively. I definitely wish I had read up more about, the different things involved and sought advice beforehand. So then when the time came, I had moments of real struggle. And I remember feeling worried because it was painful when my baby latched. I kept questioning, am I doing it right? One night while he was asleep, I just watched tons of videos to learn different latching positions and techniques. And the next morning I tried moving him from one position to another, hoping to find something that was, felt a bit more comfortable. Nothing felt quite right. And then I moved him around so much that he just ended up spitting up all his milk.
Oh,
so
no.
It's thankfully I had Mumsy there to reassure me. That was a massive thing for me.
Definitely.
She told me you're doing fine, you don't need to overthink it, it's going to feel uncomfortable at first because it's new, you're not used to it, but it will get easier. And that kind of support and reassurance, that's exactly what I needed at that moment, and it really helped me keep going.
Yeah, and it does make a difference, that nice just hearing those nice reassuring words, and not just kind of a rough, just latch, get on with it, everyone does it, which or
sometimes
sometimes
maybe he's not getting enough milk, and those kind of comments
those kind of doubts. But did you always believe you could do it? Because speaking of doubts, did you have any doubts? Because I knew that in my time I wanted to do it and succeed at it, but because I had come across an overwhelming, and I'm talking about overwhelming, number of negative stories online about latch issues, milk production, flow problems, and the list goes on, I actually believed in the back of my head that I would face so many problems trying to breastfeed, even if I wanted to. So I remember bringing them up in conversation to Mama Bear and like, hey, I read this and sometimes this can happen. I read that sometimes that can happen. And sometimes the milk just doesn't come out. And she would just say, don't worry, forget that. You can do it. You can do it. That's she would so just important. Say, you can do it, so she would sort of keep me in line, not go off track.
It's so good to have someone just keep you, reassure you, keep you in lane and just keep you positive. I think you can get caught up in the what ifs and drive yourself crazy, but it's just having someone to reassure you constantly that you've got this. It makes such a massive difference.
Yeah, and I remember near the time of the birth, I had some relatives ask, are you planning to breastfeed? And I said, yeah, definitely, I'm hoping to. And they would say that's so great, but it is actually very, very hard. The sleep deprivation with breastfeeding is really hard. And that was such a real comment to make, and I appreciated that because it is a reality, but it did actually make me, someone pregnant for the first time. It made me really nervous.
That's interesting. I didn't realize relatives asked those kind of questions. They're so interested. But yeah, it is a nerve-wracking thing to hear, especially because I know you love them naps.
I do love a good sleep. But then on the other hand, I had some really great positive advice from friends who had more recently breastfed, who gave me really great tips to prepare myself for the long night feeds. And I've actually got a list here of some of the tips that they sent, which I'm going to share with you all. So tip number 1, make it into an enjoyable experience. So this friend said that one nurse in particular looked at the way that she was holding her baby and said, no, grip the baby with one hand and your other hand is your magazine hand. And basically that translated as making each breastfeeding session into a bit of me time. So, you get into a comfy position, leave one hand free to read a magazine or catch up with friends on your phone. Or, if you couple the breastfeeding time with something you enjoy, you'll be happier spending the time doing it.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, so I love it too because it's you're preparing yourself for the fact that, yes, you are going to spend a long time doing it. It's just not going to be, as they might say in textbooks, recommended amount, 20-minute feed.
Yeah.
And that's it, it's done. It's not like that at all.
Yeah.
And it's not just during the day, it's also at night. So, get yourself ready, with a book, snacks, water, prepare for kind of that night shift. And just embrace the fact that you're going to have minutes to hours in that armchair or on the bed. And there are quite a few more tips I'll share a bit later, but one more for now, which I think is relevant to the whole idea of training yourself, getting yourself into the mindset, is be cool. So when you eventually get out and about, you're going to need to feed in public places. Don't be shy and nervous about it. As babies, they themselves can sense this and they'll play up more as a result. So this doesn't mean you have to expose yourself. You can be modest doing it. You can have a nursing cover at hand. But just be ready to breastfeed, in XYZ places.
Yeah, the nursing cover is definitely your best friend, especially when it comes to feeding in intimate parties or crowded places.
Yeah.
It's you become so used to the sounds that babies make when they're feeding, the sucking sounds and
yeah, the gulp.
You forget, you forget people around you aren't used to that. They don't. So it's a bit awkward, when you're used to it, and then they start hearing that
in midway through conversation. You're yeah, how are you? You just hear this. Yeah, and
that's a reality
for sure. And the nursing cover is definitely a staple in your go bag. So it's just getting used to this idea that you are your baby's source of food. Feeding in public, it's not a sexual attention thing.
Yeah.
It's very natural. It will become part of your day. So you're not going to be housebound with baby all the time, especially if you have an older child. So you will need to get out and about to the shop, appointments and so on. So get this thought out of your head from now that people are just going to look at me as someone who's trying to get attention or think that this is something I should only be doing in private.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is where the stigma comes in, culturally as well as socially. And I think culturally, especially as Asians, you're expected to go into a private room, sit and breastfeed away from everyone else because, hello, it's awkward. And then you miss out on all the social interaction and all the fun.
But that's the thing, it's only as awkward as people make it. So I think at this point in both our journeys, we're both so used to just popping the baby in a carrier, dropping the nursing cover around our necks and getting on with it, but still being present in the room, socializing, eating. But it does definitely take some work to get to this point.
Yeah, feeling comfortable doing that. It doesn't come straight away, definitely.
Yeah.
But when you understand, how time-consuming and even isolating breastfeeding can be, the carrier, the nursing cover method, that becomes a way around that to just, get on with feeding and just be in the social setting so you don't miss out.
Yeah, I guess another aspect too is also that strong belief in modesty and bashfulness in our faith, which I think some people maybe have taken to extremes culturally, like especially when it comes to breastfeeding, because it's a beautiful concept, modesty, but you need to be practical about it, and having a nursing cover just enables you to feed your child whilst being modest.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I do have moments where, toddler tries to flip up the nursing cover, and I'm just like, I have a panic attack at that moment, and I'm like, no, don't do that. But yeah, I personally love the carrier, and I do look like I'm smuggling like a sack of potatoes, but you get used to the look and feel of it. And what you need to just prepare yourself for is that one day when you're ready, there are tools to help you breastfeed comfortably in public without feeling like you're, offending others or inconveniencing them.
Right. And the funny thing is, whenever I think of you now, I just always have an image of you in my head with your baby carrier nursing cover, because you've made it such a statement.
Yeah, literally every single family photo. I think whenever we take photos at family gatherings, I've just got that cover, forget about the nice outfit I'm wearing. But yeah, I think another important thing to mention is that when you decide to exclusively breastfeed, be ready for all kinds of unsolicited advice, because apparently, everyone becomes a lactation expert overnight once they hear you're breastfeeding, and, it's like comments like, are you sure you're making enough milk? And, just give the baby a bottle, it'll be easier.
They're so hungry.
Yeah.
You're making them so hungry.
Yeah, the comments can get really annoying really quick. But the best thing you can do is just trust yourself. Remember why you made this choice. Tune out the noise. Surround yourself with the people that are giving you those positive comments. Not everyone needs to understand your decision, and that's okay. Your baby, your bobs, your business.
Oof, that's a controversial statement. But it has to be said, I think. And this actually gives me an idea for another episode topic, and who decides to breastfeed? Who should have a say in that decision? I mean, I think we know the answer to that. The majority will probably be, mother and father of the baby, but...
Yeah, but that would be a really interesting discussion, I think, because not everyone thinks that.
Yeah, so let us know what all you listeners think, and if you'd like us to dive into that topic, or a topic like that. So a little recap for now what we've covered. Number 1 tip, get comfortable accepting that breastfeeding isn't a 2-minute job. It's going to take time, even up to hours. So just make yourself comfy with that magazine, with your phone.
Put those feet up and earplugs in.
And be prepared to be productive in breastfeeding, but very unproductive in other things.
Yeah, like housework.
Housework. So breastfeeding's time consuming, it's tiring, you'll get sore in your back, it can get boring sometimes. There are ways around that. So, just be prepared with your book and your phone. Number 2, in terms of tips, is...
be cool.
Yes. Okay, so go with the flow. You're out and about. What we said about it takes time to build up to this, but you're out and about. Your baby needs to feed, fine, no big deal. Let's get on with it. Don't worry, people aren't watching you as intently as you think. They probably likely don't even care. And I would say the third key tip for getting in the right mindset to breastfeed is to be prepared to sacrifice.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So we all know about sleep deprivation, of course. You are going to sacrifice your sleep, especially to breastfeed, but you are also going to be sacrificing your ability to go out and socialize for several hours at a time, baby free, especially in the evening.
Yeah, definitely. It's not an easy thing, and again, it's only relevant to those women who have made the choice to exclusively breastfeed. We know that obviously those women who are successfully pumping milk and whose babies take a bottle, they can definitely leave their baby for a few hours in the day or even evening or overnight.
Oh, that is the dream.
The dream, for sure.
But I've definitely not been able to do that or take advantage of the whole overnight thing as much as you, just being away from family. But going back to the sacrifice, it's honestly only for a few years. I feel like maybe up to 18 months or 2 years if you're planning to exclusively feed to sleep for that long.
Yeah, it also depends on when you're planning to night wean and wean fully as well. So like I said before, like we weaned our first at 19 months, so we did have a bit of, you know, freedom earlier on where we could just leave them overnight and stuff, but you still have that separation anxiety that, you know, the baby faces when you go out. But yeah, in the grand scale of things, I think it's definitely not that long a time to sacrifice your evenings.
Yeah, it really does go by quickly. But it's interesting you said that, because I do remember not having fully weaned from breastfeeding, but still coming over to yours for a weekend. So I just left the little one with Daddy.
Oh my gosh,
yeah. And they managed, yeah. I mean, I hadn't fully weaned her yet. And obviously when I went back, I did breastfeed again. But yeah, so it's not always necessary to fully wean before you, you know, have those weekends away.
Yeah, we had a whole mama spa weekend.
Yeah, burgers, food, everything. So also, it's not necessarily just in terms of, you know, the sacrifice in terms of going out and socializing. It also applies to those nights in with hubby when the kids are in bed and, you know, you sit down to eat and watch something. The frequent wakings, and they're just so common with breastfed babies. And so you will find, ladies, that, you know, you are up and down, in and out of the baby's room, feeding them back to sleep several times during your personal evening time until you finally go to bed.
Yeah, you know, pausing that movie or documentary several times.
Yeah, it's just something that has to be done. It's like, oh, baby is awake. Pause, head up, come down, hit play again. And I'd like to think it's not just us. Other ladies are like in and out of the baby's room too.
Yeah.
And I would just add that this is definitely the case with co-sleeping. And this is what we've both done and what we both have experience with. I'm aware, obviously, that, of course, there are couples who decide not to feed to sleep and not to co-sleep. And they might have a different experience. So let us know about your experiences and decisions. We do love to hear about different exclusive breastfeeding journeys.
Yeah, I mean, there must be others who also experience that same, you know, going back and forth. And sometimes you'll have like something like 20 breaks when you're watching a documentary with your partner before you just call it a night and give up and just say, oh, forget it. And it's also one of the ways you can actually prep your partner for what breastfeeding involves, you know, the patience to get through that great movie in bits.
That takes a lot of patience.
Yeah. But don't worry, it's not every night. You know, we don't mean to scare the mamas to be. Some nights you will get that uninterrupted couple and me time, and it is bliss.
Absolutely. And it definitely comes at a time when, like, you need that recharge. But it's funny because during those times, that's when the phantom baby cries are amplified. So you think you'll hear the baby cry, and then you go up and you check, and they're fast asleep.
Yeah. I remember when that happened, when I fell asleep in the other room one night. I woke up at 2 a.m. naturally, and I just went to him sleeping in his room, and he was completely fast asleep. And I was just like, why hasn't he woken up yet? That was such a crazy moment. The first time he was actually sleeping through the night, it was like, there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
So yes, be prepared to sacrifice. Motherhood is all about sacrifice, right? But more so if you are exclusively breastfeeding, because you're sacrificing that freedom, the uninterrupted evenings.
Going out for long periods of time as well without the baby in those early days, and the uninterrupted evening meals. You're sacrificing all of that.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like as soon as you heat up your plate and sit down to eat, that's when they decide to wake up. Yeah. It's like, how do they know?
How do they know that?
As soon as like mama opens their mouth to eat.
As soon as the bum hits the chair.
Great. So on to the fourth tip to get yourself into the mindset to breastfeed, I would say, is to get ready to succeed, but be prepared to fail.
What? What do you mean?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense, but
no, that doesn't make sense.
Okay, hold on, let me explain. So do all the prep, like we were saying. You know, you need to mentally and physically make sure that you are successful in breastfeeding your baby. Do that, you know, do that prep work. But as we've been saying, so prepare yourself to expect that there is a lot of sleep deprivation, attachment, inability to leave the house alone or even go to the toilet for like long periods of time, because you'll be on call to feed. But at the same time, you'll be forming this beautiful bond whereby you're sharing, you know, what your body's produced specifically for your child, with your child. You know, it's a miracle. And you have this like unparalleled ability to just soothe your child.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. So be prepared to fail?
Yeah, so the next part is be prepared to fail. So I don't know, so not sure if fail is the right word here. So maybe like let's say, be prepared to struggle.
Okay.
So not everyone has like a straightforward breastfeeding journey. You know, not every baby just latches and goes. Sometimes there are hurdles before you can get to that routine of breastfeeding and consistent milk flow, feeling comfortable doing it, feeding with ease, and so on.
Yeah. And there are numerous like stories like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So not everyone has that straightforward breastfeeding journey. So what you need to do is prepare yourself mentally that it's okay to ask for help. You know, just because you have the goods, it doesn't mean you can't consult other people to help you. Yeah, so breastfeeding is natural, it's instinctive, but that's not to say that women don't face problems initially or along the way. And, you know, you don't know what your birth experience is going to be like. You know, you can prepare for that as much as you want, but, you know, you could have a traumatic birth experience which needs working through, and you may have had complications, but still would like to breastfeed, you know, with the right support.
Yeah, I think a common problem nowadays is like at the sign of an initial problem, and some of our health visitors and health professionals are guilty of this. If a baby is like underweight at one of the initial visits, one of the first pieces of advice is, oh, top them up with formula. You know, it's not, hey, here's a list of numbers of qualified lactation consultants who do home visits, they can help you. You know, we can even bring one with us on the next visit, that kind of thing.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly it. So, you know, if you're pregnant and wanting to exclusively breastfeed, start now. Start asking around and getting those contact details for a qualified lactation consultant who can come and help you if, you know, just in case you need that specific support. I think a good friend of ours actually did just this, and we'll hopefully bring them on as a guest in a future episode for a first-hand view on this.
Okay, so get ready to succeed, but be prepared to fail. I like that. That makes sense now.
Yeah, so, you know, be prepared to fail or be prepared to struggle. So that's actually reminded me of some prep I did personally myself by attending an antenatal class before baby one. So the midwife was great. It was midwife-led. And she said one of the ways you can prepare yourself to breastfeed is by not pre-buying formula, bottles, sterilizers, kind of like all that equipment just in case I don't produce enough milk, or just in case I can't like breastfeed, because you don't know yet. Because the reality is that if you have all of those options waiting for you in the cupboard, you're probably less likely to persevere through the sheer difficulties of breastfeeding.
That's interesting. That's a bit controversial though, I think.
Yeah, but you see, it shouldn't be, because it's not a comparison between feeding methods. I actually had some people ask me, are you going to buy formula just in case you don't produce enough milk because this happened to X person? So my breastfeeding journey was like already being compared to someone else's before it even started. And I think that made me really anxious as well, and that's where, I'd go back to Mama Bear and say, X person said this, and she'd just be like, forget it, you want to do it, you can do it, you will be able to do it.
Everyone's different as well. But yeah, that is an example of like the kind of negative influence you don't need when you're already apprehensive about breastfeeding anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So like I said, the advice that I got, from my go-to person, she was adamant, trust me, you'll be fine, you don't need it. Positivity, I think, breeds positivity.
Definitely. That actually makes me think of another important aspect of your mindset preparation, which is the sort of like spiritual preparation side of things. For me, like I personally prayed so much for my own breastfeeding journey to go smoothly, and I know you did as well. So just like sitting down and praying, for your breastfeeding journey, that it goes well, that it goes as straightforward as possible is so, so important. It doesn't matter which spiritual path you follow. And I don't mean to sound like, oh, you just gotta pray, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, like when people find out that you're pregnant, they say, really nice things like, hope your pregnancy goes well, hope the delivery goes smoothly, but they never really mention, your breastfeeding journey. If they know that's what you're choosing to do, they never really kind of say like, oh, pray for a smooth breastfeeding journey as well. So yeah, I actually remember you mentioning like before, around the time that I was also having the baby, one of our very close friends was also having a baby, and she hosted like a really nice kind of pre-baby get-together. She had this really nice idea of having these prayer cards so all the guests could write down, prayers for the parents to be. And I remember you mentioning that you wrote, because you knew that she was wanting to breastfeed exclusively, you specifically wrote a really nice like breastfeeding message, like I really hope your journey goes smoothly, and just positive things like, you can do it. So I feel like that's such a really like nice positive message to put out there.
Yeah, and this just leads me on to another aspect of your preparation to breastfeed, which is that work to surround yourself with the people who are going to pick you up and cheer you on. So when I was pregnant with baby number 1, I actually did just that. I started doing my market research and asking friends who had had babies, what breastfeeding advice they had, and just started creating that bank of advice that I could follow. So one of my friends gave me some advice and then just said, call me if you ever have any problems. I think that's really nice to hear. And that's the kind of support that you need, which is a great lead on to our topic next episode.
Yes, and stay tuned for the next episode where we'll be talking about the all-important support circle that you'll need going into your breastfeeding journey. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to follow our Instagram page, Laughing Cows Official, to stay up to date with all things milk.